How many of you heard about XP going away? Anybody heard about that? Yeah, okay. Here's the thing. And Kevin here was actually able to list out almost correctly, because you almost left out 2000, a list of all of the OSs, you know, from 3 to 3.1, 3.11 work groups, 95, 98, ME, 2000, XP, Vista, Vista R2, anyway. And there's almost never been quite the feeling, quite the hubbub about an OS going away as there has been with XP. Now, part of the challenge, of course, is that Microsoft wants your money. And those people who, how many of you are still using XP? Let's be honest, come on.
Keep my boss.
Of course, yeah, it's the boss, yeah. The lousy thing works, and it keeps working. And people who paid Microsoft several $100, and we've talked about this at previous luncheonars, Microsoft hasn't seen any more money from you, and you should feel really bad about that. And for all your basic computing needs as they have stood, it's worked pretty well. So why is it going away? We'll talk a little bit about it, but for those of you who want, and if you think about it, the Amish are catching up to you technologically speaking. Okay, so as people move forward to new platforms and new technologies, the Amish are catching. So just keep that in mind, but that's cool. Some cases there are very legitimate reasons why you stick with XP. In some cases it's a learning curve, whatever. We'll talk about those things. But so this is not going to be a veiled turnaround of, now let's tell you why you should buy the new one. Yeah, whatever. You're probably getting that all over the place. This is really going to be talking about how to survive with XP and also to understand what your risks are. Okay? So let's first talk about the good news. One of the key things to understand with Microsoft is what's happening is they are stopping to enhance XP. Then they are stopping putting out any kind of updates. Now, you may have heard an announcement about a month or so ago that Microsoft was extending some functions or some aspects of their XP work. That was strictly for their security pieces, their antivirus, their anti-malware tools. They're going to continue to update patches for those tools. So the things that help protect, they don't completely protect, but that help protect your systems, those will still be going on for another year. But the actual operating system itself, as of April 8th, there's no longer going to be. So as people discover additional holes in the operating system, whether it be security, performance, reliability, anything along those lines, up till April 8th, Microsoft has had a role in saying we'll fix those and we'll clean those up. After April 8th, Microsoft will essentially go, yeah, it sucks. Okay? So understand the difference on this. So your license, whatever license you have, you still have that same license. You can still run it. If you bought it with a computer, you can still have it. Any programs that run with it, absolutely, you're more than welcome to keep. So the license is still valid. And the software is not going to lose any of its functionality. Meaning that whatever the software was able to do, the software will continue to be able to do. The sky does not fall on April 8th. That's the next thing, is that, and this is some question of conjecture. When we get into security, this is going to be one of the key things here, is that all of a sudden on April 9th, it's not going to be, remember the Y2K, December 31st to January 1st, the sky's going to end, all that kind of thing. No one's really predicting that for this, which was kind of too bad, because that was cool talking about those and all the TV movie. There hasn't been a TV movie made yet about the XP the night after kind of thing, which would have been kind of cool. But what will happen is you're going to have a sliding scale. You're going to become more and more out of touch with some of the mainstream applications, and we'll talk about that, and you're also going to have a higher and higher security risk the longer time goes on after April 8th. Okay? But your stuff is going to work. It's the other people who aren't going to want to talk to you anymore. I can tell you what that's like. Okay? So, there's also some applications that XP will run that later versions won't, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, it's also cool for the retro look. Not so good news. No security patches, we already talked about that. Many applications will not work. Now, what I mean by that is that if a third party is presenting applications out to the public, those applications, they have to make it run on whoever they think their customer base is. And if they look at the customer base, and I'll be honest here, and they look at it and go, okay, the XP people, they're not spending money because they're still running XP. So am I going to write my application that's going to be it's only going to shrink. The base of people who are using XP is only going to shrink. It's not going to grow. And we've got the hardware and software restrictions. They're not going to do that. And that doesn't even take into account security issues, which, again, we'll get into those. AV and security software will start to not be upgraded. And we'll talk about this at first. Symantec endpoint protection will continue to support XP. AVG, Microsoft Defender, or whatever the latest term for it is, all of those kind of things. But slowly but surely, even they're going to stop dropping off. And I've got a chart that kind of shows why. So you're going to have, what you're doing here is you're basically buying some time here as far as the XP goes. Some networks won't even allow you to connect. Okay? Because the biggest security risk is the other device that's attached to your network. If that has certain access to your resources, then however vulnerable that guy is, that's how vulnerable you are. It's kind of like you have this great, fantastic door, security system, all that, and then you put a doggy door down in the bottom. Okay, the doggy door pretty much just bypassed all the other security pieces. So you're as secure as that. Similarly, if you've got a network that you're allowing XP boxes to connect to your network, and at the same time you're securing the network, but still you've done some tricks to allow the XP boxes, all they need to know is to know to go in that direction. Okay? And retro, when I say retro is so retro, the issue on that is a lot of the interface, a lot of the applications are touch enabled. You're going to see more and more. Microsoft Watch, everybody buy iPads. Microsoft Watch, everybody with their phones and everybody with their iPhones and with their droids and all that kind of thing. And they made the decision that the world is going touch enabled. And so has pretty much everybody else. So you're seeing more and more applications where a large part of the functionality is I can touch it, I can move things, I can take my fingers and widen it, I can do all those kind of. XP doesn't do that terribly well. Does it have some of those capabilities? Yeah, it's sort of added in at the afterwards. It's retrofitted. So retro works until you need to do something that isn't retro. Okay? So, how to avoid upgrading? You can't. Okay? The exception to this is if you basically go offline. If you go offline and you take your XP machine, you don't do any internet browsing, you don't do any program updates, all you do is whatever it was you were doing and you just copy files off of it and paste the files onto another machine that's better. So you've got this one machine that's basically secure, can face the world, it's a Windows 7, Windows 8, whatever. You do all of your internet, all that sort of stuff there, and then you copy stuff when you want to work on it on your XP box and copy it over there. So why is that relatively safe? Well, that's relatively safe because this is the guy who's taken all the risks. Your more up-to-date machine. That's the one that's going to the websites. That's the one that's actually pulling down email. It's opening files. It's doing all of those kind of things. And if you're keeping that puppy patched, and you've got AV software, protective software, all that kind of thing, it's basically doing making sure things are secure. So I basically broke this down into 3 categories. First of all, security, then old applications and new applications. So by security, I'm primarily talking about the ability for an external force to do things to your system or information that you don't want or that you're not expecting to happen. Okay? Old applications, that's basically applications that have not been updated, they have not been renewed. Whether it be a label printer that you bought 10 years ago at a bargain bin at CompUSA, or a version of Office that's not the latest version. It's been upgraded, but you haven't followed the upgrade. And then new applications. I want to run the new stuff, but I've got an XP box. What can I do? Security. When we talk about security, there's really 3 pieces of security. And those pieces are this. There's the user. Don't open email attachments if you don't know who they're sent from. We've heard this all the time, but this one's probably okay. Okay? Don't reply to somebody with, hey, oh, I understand, here's my password. You know, because all the software in the world is not going to protect the computer against you if you're just doing things without thinking these things through. The operating system. Operating systems have holes in them. They all do. Now keep in mind that XP first came out in 2003. And when 2003 came out, Microsoft up to that point, and nobody else in the industry, but Microsoft included, really wasn't taking security that seriously. It was all about how can we do more? How can we make it easier for systems to connect with each other? Bill Gates had his second epiphany that security is important. His first one was that the internet's real. Okay? But he had his second epiphany and literally went around with all the developers and all that and said, hey, we have to start looking at security seriously. Well, XP was already out, pretty much, by the time that happened. So it's not designed to be secure. It's been added to, it's been enhanced, but it wasn't from the ground up. So those holes in there, a lot of you, if you haven't patched, you still have these security holes. Well, that's okay, because I've got my antivirus. And by this antivirus, I mean antivirus, anti-malware, firewalls, everything, all the protective software and devices that we add to it, I put under this category. Well, what's happening is boom. Microsoft on April 8th is essentially saying whatever you got stays. That's it. So from April 8th on, any additional hole in the operating system is not going to be fixed. But it will be publicized. So you've got all these guys sitting out there who write malware, viruses, all that kind of thing, who just got an alert that this little piece of software now has this vulnerability. And by the way, nobody's going to fix it. Well, I could either spend a lot more time going after secure operating systems that have a lot of market share, or I could be really lazy and just write it to go after this guy. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be looking for those, and as soon as they see them, they're going to start writing code that will be, malevolent. Ransomware. How many of you guys have heard of ransomware? Okay. Was it CryptoLocker? Yeah. CryptoLocker? Okay. I love this one. This is just so cool. I mean, they're bad guys, they're evil, we should take them out and kill them, blah, blah, blah. But wow, they did a good job with this one. This is a piece of software where if the end user opens up an attachment, it will then encrypt all of the data on your computer, plus all of the data on every network device it can get its hands on, and you will not be able to break the encryption.
Unless you pay them money.
It will then start a countdown timer. And you have to pay, and it's a reasonable amount.
10,000?
$300. It goes up, yeah, 300. No ups, no downs, no extras. It's Earl Scheib.
Is it for a workstation?
Nope, 300. They're reasonable. Come on, they're not greedy. And you pay the money, and they'll send you the key. Now here's the thing, and this is why this one scares me. It's a good business model. They're not overpriced. So it's not worth anybody's time to really invest a lot of money in how to fix this, okay, except for antivirus to keep it from encrypting in the first place. The easiest thing is to pay the freaking amount of money because it's only $300. And they made sure that they had enough servers available because originally when they first came out with it, their servers would crash. So they upped customer service, it's important. They upped their servers so it could handle people paying the ransom. They actually included some sites that would help guide people through. They were using Bitcoin, I think, for the transaction, so it was. You guys have a good business model. So now you've got worse than people who write viruses. You've got business people who are involved, who actually want to make more money. So they've got it's a great little deal for them. You ain't seen nothing yet. Last year, fourth quarter of last year was really the first time ransomware took off. And you've already got a lot of other companies who are going, hey, we could do this too. When the XP happens, once April 8th, as soon as people see those vulnerabilities, they're going to start going after them because they can make money out of it. Okay? This one, and I've spoken about this a number of times, this one scares me. I mean, as far as this is a serious thing. So, your AVG or your Symantec, you write antivirus software. You could write the best antivirus software in the world, but it won't protect against OS holes. Okay? In a lot of cases, it just can't. Or they're going to have to completely rebuild their technology from the ground up, and we've already talked about this is a shrinking market share. It's not a growing market share. So we're going to be left within a year or two where the only thing we can hope for is that the user is going to be cool. So this is why I'm saying security is so critical, because you have to understand we have opportunity, we have motive on the outside people, and we've got the vendors who are offering some protection that they're not going to have an incentive to stick around. So from a security standpoint, if you're going to have workstations that are connecting to the outside world and you have data on those things that you're concerned about, you're on a sinking ship. It's just a question of how much can we bail out while it's sinking. Okay?
You should probably also just stick in, just because that third piece there, the user aspect, this person is going to this website, they click the wrong thing, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't even have to be that. Several years back, there was an issue where these nefarious places were infecting ad servers. And so your MSN, your Yahoo, all those places are paying for these ad services to display on their pages, but the ads are encrypted, or not, they're infected. So you are now looking at this legitimate page and still getting infected. So the user doesn't even have to do anything. They just have to exist and do what they were doing all along. So that's how unstable that last little chunk of the pie is.
So what do? First of all, this is a pain in the butt. XP, local administrator, when you run programs on your computer, there's actually two parties involved. There's the computer and then there's the user. And the user is the person who logs on when you first turn on your computer, if it asks you for a password. And if it doesn't ask you for a password, it just goes on, you still have a user account. It's just the default. And essentially, the user has certain settings that tells what that user is allowed to do at your computer. And by default, a lot of cases in XP, they run with local administrator, which means you can do anything. You want to add a program, add a program. You want to remove a program, remove a program. You want to add an update. You want to install a virus, go for it. Well, the problem is that with those settings, with XP, it's difficult to control what you're installing. And in some cases, you're installing stuff that you don't even know you're installing. If you take away the local administrator rights, it will error out. It will not allow you to install stuff because you don't have the rights. So you end up with two user accounts on your computer. One is your local administrator, and the other one is your normal day-to-day. So your normal day-to-day, that's the one where it won't install stuff for you. And your local admin is when you know you have to install something. There is an update, there is a patch, there is something you want to do. In which case you log off, you log on with your new account, you make sure that happens, make sure that runs right. Be really careful what websites you visit. Kevin brought up a great point. When you go to an MSN or anybody's website and you see all those ads over on the sides, that doesn't mean that that company approved all those ads. Those are usually third parties or even sometimes fourth parties who they basically have said, we want to rent out this space and we can place 4 ads. Cleveland.com is a great example of that. Cleveland.com is a fantastic company and organization. Work there. Okay. Cleveland.com is a good example of okay. But what ends up happening, and it's understandable, they'll just rent out this whole space and they'll leave it up to this third party to fill it with ads for their client, who could also rent out a third of that space to somebody else. Well, there's less and less review, control, management of those advertisers, so by the time it gets down there, who knows who? Be extra careful about adding new programs. Look for checkboxes. If there's a checkbox, be careful. Read what it says, and if it says something along the lines, I'd also like to install, no, don't. It's your rule of thumb. Keep track of your security software's XP policies. In other words, if whoever you've got your antivirus, anti-malware, or whatever, once in a while check and see whether they've actually dropped XP support. Because in some cases, they'll just do that and they won't bother telling anybody. Okay? And when somebody says, hey, look at this cool file I've got on this thumb drive. Yeah, okay. You know, has anyone actually scanned it, taken a look at it? Browsers. We're already starting to see this. Actually, we've seen this for a long time. Is the browser or website is hosted by a company. Duh. And that company may have certain interests in terms of their security. Banking sites are the most popular. And so they may not want your site, you, to go browse to their site unless you've got a relatively secure browser. Okay? Now, in some cases, the opposite is true. You have a more secure browser, and they don't accept that either, especially banking sites, because they take a little longer to adapt to newer technology. So an example of that is on XP, Internet Explorer 8. That is the newest. Right now, Microsoft is on Internet Explorer 11. Internet Explorer 8 is the newest one you can be running on XP. Can't run 9, 10, or 11. Okay? More and more sites you're going to see are going to start denying. We have one client who uses a third party who has their vertical application, and they've told them that as of April, you can't use Internet Explorer 8 to access their application, period. You may start seeing that. So far, other browsers, Chrome and Firefox were the two. Any others? Those are the two main ones. Okay. Chrome and Firefox, at this point, their latest versions will actually still run on XP. So if you're using Internet Explorer, you may want to download Chrome or Firefox and start getting used to that, because you're going to start seeing sites where they won't allow you to use Internet Explorer. Okay? As of right now, I haven't heard anything from anybody as far as that these guys are going to drop support, but your mileage may vary on that. If you have critical websites that you go to, and by this, websites that have some need of security, in other words, that there is usually username, password, possible financial transactions go back and forth. If there's anybody critical, check with them to see whether they have announcements saying that they're not going to support, whether it be browsers or OSs or anything along those lines. Now let's talk about old applications, and let's also talk about printers. Printers, when we say printers, we'll just say devices. If 1930, late 1930s, airplanes, pretty much the biplane was on its way out. Okay, the monoplane, single wing, pretty much took over. In the 40s, early mid-40s, I think 1943 was where the first jet engine flew in the United States anyway. It was earlier than that for Germany and the like. No one ever said, how can we get that jet engine to work on a biplane? Okay? Technology, there has to be some kind of level. In other words, if you have devices that you've purchased 10 years ago, you cannot assume that those devices are going to work with computing equipment that was purchased today. Okay? The reverse is also true. If you have a computer that was purchased 10 years ago, a new printer is not necessarily going to work. So two things have to happen. Number one is if you are looking, if you have software, if you have devices that you're currently using on your XP environment, you need to check it out. Go to the websites and check to see whether or not the drivers work, or whether or not there are drivers or there are program updates or whatever. Usually it's not hard to find. Okay? The biggest issue is when you find, the biggest thing you're going to find is when you find the bargain basement stuff. The stuff that costs 10 bucks, 15 bucks. You know, the printer that was $99 10, 15 years ago. The manufacturer probably didn't have a lot of money to spend in R&D to update the drivers, to update the software and the like. What you do, if you stick with that version as far as old applications, you're okay. Another thing that's happening is what are called the 16-bit applications. Now, you may hear the term, actually today it's more 32-bit and 64-bit. Whenever we talk about that stuff, it's really, if you think about a processor has a certain level, I'll call it an IQ level. How many bits can it process at a time? And each bit doubles the power. So you go from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, and actually, no, it squares the power, excuse me. So a 16-bit processor can only be this smart, a 32-bit processor significantly smarter, and a 64-bit processor way smarter than that. When you write code for one of those platforms. You write it for 16, you write it for 32, you write it for 64. 64-bit code runs a lot faster than 32-bit code that runs a lot faster than 16-bit code. You can't run 64-bit on a 32, so your processor has to be at least what it was written in. Well, here's the other thing. XP can still run 16-bit code. 7 and 8, Windows 7 and 8 cannot. So if you have a program, a really old program, that's running 16-bit code, it's not even a question of whether it won't work. Are there some emulators and all that? No, it won't work. So again, with the old applications, hoarding all the support you can find. One of the other things is that the vendor who made the device or the software or whatever is not necessarily going to remember what it was they did 8 years ago that fixed a problem. Okay? Why should they? You know, if you buy any other device, once it's past the warranty, the manufacturer doesn't necessarily have to honor fixing it and all that kind of thing. Software isn't really that much different. This is especially true. We're going to go away from the XP a little bit. This is especially true for companies who are running their vertical applications. So if you're running a program that runs your business, this is especially true with the manufacturing world. You know, it's our standard joke when we do our is your IT obsolete? Manufacturing companies' definition of obsolescence is it doesn't turn on. If it doesn't turn on, it's obsolete. Otherwise, we'll still use it. And the issue is that it gets harder and harder to find people to support those applications who have experience and who can say, yeah, that's how we fix this problem. That's how we fix that problem. And I've used the analogy before, the toad in the water. You know, if you put a toad into a pot of water and then put it at room temperature and you put it on the stove and you slowly raise the temperature, the toad will sit there and boil to death. They won't realize the fact that this big change is happening and it's going to kill them. All right? Whereas if you take a pot of boiling water and you toss the toad in there, they're going to know immediately this sucks and they need to get out as quickly as possible. All right? A lot of companies, when they don't upgrade their software for years, they don't realize the fact that this is actually going to come up and bite them in the end. Whereas a new employee comes into that company and they go, wow, what did I get myself into? Do I wear my bell bottoms and come into? You know, so, but keep in mind that hidden cost of additional support and all that. So, new applications. So we've got this old XP box and we want to run new applications with it. First of all, good luck. And you got to be careful on this one because in some cases, especially true with larger applications, it'll work unless you try this, unless you do this, or unless they turn this off. Because remember we talked about how some vendors are actually, they don't want you to connect with the old stuff. So yeah, we could allow you to, but we don't want to because it's not a very secure environment. So we're disabling that. Okay? You will find a lot of people who have tried, you name the application, and whether it works good or bad. First of all, if you're running XP 64-bit version, good luck. That didn't work all that well to speak with a lot of pieces, parts, and all that, and applications are not going to be much better. The one option that you have is to do what's called remote desktop terminal server, and this is really for the companies who still have XP workstations. That's where you have a server that's running a more up-to-date software, and that's actually the one running the programs. So if, for example, you wanted to have Office 2013, and right now you can't on XP, you can only be running Office 2010, but you really want Office 2013. what you can do is you can put a server in place, you may already have it, that is running an OS that can either do remote desktop, terminal server, or the like, and it will actually run the software, but you'll see it on your screen. So the server is actually doing all the work. That will sort of work. What do I mean by sort of? The problem is that these remote servers, terminal server, remote desktop server, all that, they've got their own security requirements. They also want to know that the desktop connecting to them is a secure desktop. And so they can be, and by default often are, configured to not allow unsupported systems to connect. So, and this is going to get tighter, like everything else, as time goes on. So this will give you a shortcut that you can actually have that system running your software for the desktops. But ultimately, if you're going to run and maintain a secure environment, that functionality is going to go away. This is not going to get better. This is going to get worse. Every solution that we've come up with is a solution that's temporary at best, not reliable at best, and has its own limits. You know, again, we try not to make this into a whole, we're going to sell Microsoft and we're going to do this. There's a whole bunch of choices out there, whether you go with, you know, moving over to an Apple world or an Android / Google world or whatever. But the thing is that if you look at the functionality, the things that the new devices can do, the video conferencing, the multiple sessions going on, the multimedia, the touch interaction, voice recognition, all of the camera settings, and all of the security enhancements and all that's been added to it. XP can do any one of those things at one time, maybe. Cannot do two of them, and do not ask it to do three. So by sticking with XP, you're limiting yourself for a lot of that additional functionality, which a lot of it is like, yeah, but some of it's actually pretty useful or pretty cool. And more importantly, more and more people out there are going to be using it and expecting other people to use it. So I absolutely think that for the next few months, yes, you can continue using XP. Yes, you'll be able to have, you know, some level of comfort. But the longer you do that, the more open you are. And the thing is that a lot of people, especially small business owners, when we talk to them, their comments on security is, well, nobody wants my data. Okay? It's not a question of stealing your data. It's a question of holding it for ransom. And the only way that this model, this ransomware model, is going to work is if they infect as many people as they possibly can. So it's not on their, so they don't want you personally, but they'll take you. So absolutely, absolutely, the sky is not falling yet. As I mentioned, Server 2003 goes, we're going to have the same conversation except for Server 2003 in a year. Okay? Much more business oriented, obviously. But that's going to be an issue as well.
Thank you.
Any questions, anything like that? Yay! Thank you.